If you want to see your name at the beginning of all of our videos, as well as see exclusive content here on the homestead, please feel free to join our Patreon. Memberships start off at just $1 a month. And as always, thank you for your support.
If I have a doe in the program that's a great producer, she's still giving us very large litters, she's taking care of her babies, just absolutely all around great mom, we will keep her in the program until I have a replacement for her. Now, with that being said, if you look at this girl right here, Sadie, she has 2 daughters currently in the barn. She has Velma and she has Cyrax. And she is still here. I'm still hoping to breed her. And that is because both Velma and Cyrax have not been proven yet. So I have 2 daughters up Sadie that have a very nice body type, and they have done very well at show. They have the potential to replace their mother. But I won't know until I get at least 1 litter out of both of them, and then grow those kids out. So right now, those 2 does are getting about to maturity, which means I can breed them to get that litter. But I won't replace Sadie until I know that her daughters are good producers, because I don't want to end up in a situation where I cull out a great brood doe and replace her with does that don't produce very well. So in short, I remove a doe from a program when I have her proven replacement. This is Meatloaf. Meatloaf is one of my rabbits that doesn't automatically pose because he's still learning. So I'm going to use him as an example. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that the front feet are in line with the eyes and that the rear feet are in line with the hips. Once you get the feet into the proper position, you are going to give the rabbit a little smoosh. Now, as you can see here, Meatloaf's not really used to that, so I'm just going to repose him again. And again, I'm just going to get him in position, give him some good pets. And this is just something you continue to work on. Front feet under the eyes, rear feet under the hips, little smush. Short sessions often to kind of train them how to do it, and eventually they'll pose on their own. So something that I like to do when people disagree with my source of meat on the homestead is ask what their solutions are. So let's say I culled out every single one of my rabbits, threw them in the freezer, and vowed never to raise meat rabbits again. What would the solution be to feed my family? And when it comes to where I live, let me give you some background as to why we need meat to sustain ourselves and compared to gardening. I live in the mountains of Colorado. We get very little moisture compared to people who are not in this arid climate. My winters can get as low as apparently negative 50 degrees Fahrenheit. That happened this last week. And normally in the summer, they're only as warm as the 70s. Every once in a while, we go up to the 80s. And my grow season is maybe 90 days, pushing it. To be honest, it's closer to 60 days. We do very well growing potatoes, carrots, and cold weather veggies, but not to the level where it's sustainable on its own, so we do raise meat. So what meat is going to be as sustainable as rabbits? Let's talk about chickens. And it can't be Cornish crosses, because those are not sustainable in that I would have to order them every single time from a hatchery. I love me some meat birds, don't get me wrong, but they're not sustainable from that standpoint. And I've had heritage chickens before. I got 5 out in the coop right now that are laying in meat breeds. But heritage chickens can take anywhere from 4 to 6 months to grow out to the same size that some of my breeding rabbits do. And my rabbits take half the time. I only have 2 acres on this homestead, so raising cattle isn't really an option, nor any other large animal, to be honest. I might be able to have one of those things, but that's not sustainable in that I would need to go out and buy those animals every time we got done raising, butchering, freezing, and start over. I'm sorry, Your Highness, I will continue to scratch you. I mean, I could raise guinea pigs for meat. It's kind of the same idea. Though I'm sure people would also have a problem with that. My quails are great, but they're small and they're not necessarily sustainable just to sustain my family for meat. They do a great job paying for the feed on the homestead, and we do eat them, but they're just not as good sustainability-wise as these little boogers. And the question therein lies, what is your solution to the problem? And I also want to ask, what do you mean by decent? What is your definition of decent? Because culturally, we can talk about that all day. When we talk about that, we start getting into ethics And when we start getting into ethics, we start talking about what people are culturally used to and how they're raised to see right and wrong. And that's a topic that can get extremely messy. If you have a mom, and especially first-time moms, because we all know first-time moms are even worse than second and third-time moms, and rabbit moms in general just suck. But if you have a mom that has their litter in the nest box and they don't cover them up, what do? You could cover them up with hay and straw and give mom time to pull fur on her own and cover them. But if it's extremely cold, or mom hasn't covered the babies in a couple of hours and you're still very worried, you will pull the fur for her. So on does, they have this patch of skin underneath their chin called a dewlap, and that is where they will pull the fur from normally when they're nesting. Now, sometimes we get overachievers and they get bald spots on other spots. Vanessa has a huge bald spot on her stomach right now. I would show you, but all of the babies are cuddling mama. But you're going to go to this dewlap area and pull the fur for her. Some rabbits don't care as you do this, others aren't going to like it, so just be fair warned. But normally I just pull enough to kind of cover the babies up and mix it in with something else. Secondary options other than pulling mama's fur includes cotton balls. You just kind of shred them up and throw them in the nest box like you would the fur. Another great option is if you have a mom that has a false pregnancy or a doe that gets overzealous and pulls way too much fur during the summer, stash that fur away in like your office or your cupboard somewhere and save it for a rainy day. Save it for a day when your does are being jerks and decide they don't want to cover their babies up. So my opinions might start an argument down in the comments section. And y'all don't need to listen to me if you have a favorite meat breed. I promise it's okay. We all know that mini Rex are the best. Pause for dramatic effect. I'm kidding. Don't get mini Rex for just meat purposes. They're really fun to raise for show, but they suck for meat. But you can eat any rabbit. But when it comes down to it, your best breeds when it comes down to your meat rabbits are going to be your tried and true commercial rabbits. New Zealand's and Californians being at the very top, as they were bred for a commercial setting. They are bred for large litters, they are bred to be large themselves and to grow fast, and they are bred to keep condition. But they can be very standoffish and not very fun personality-wise. I've noticed it more with the Californians than the New Zealand's. So just be aware, a lot of times they aren't quite as cuddly as your other meat breeds. It happens. And there are exceptions to this rule. I always get someone that comes into my comments like, no, my Californians are so cuddly. Yeah, it's okay. They can be cuddly, just know as a breed in general, they're not necessarily that way. With that being said, do I like those two breeds? Not necessarily. Have I owned them before? Yes, I have. And I always go back and forth on whether I want to get them again, just because they do make great meat rabbits. But I do have a favoritism towards my Rex and Silver Fox. So here I am. I'm going to push those as well. And then there's always the comments about, what about giant breeds? And yes, giant breeds do get big very fast, but keep in mind your meat to bone ratio. Because when we're talking about commercial type rabbits, they're going to have more meat on their bones in comparison. And that's because with those giant breeds, their bones are going to fill in faster than the meat on it itself. So if you don't mind something with less meat, or you want something for soups and stocks, or you're willing to grow your giants out a little more, those are also a great option. If you are looking for a, quote, smaller meat rabbit, I'd also look into Florida Whites. There are a couple of larger lop breeds that I heard are pretty good, like the English and the French. And then I also have friends who raise Satins, but they do warn me there's a reason why Satins are called Satans. But I can't get over how shiny they are. If you're looking for something a little more unique, try Cinnamons, Palominos, Cream d'Argents. Bruins are another option for the more unique. And that's really all I can name off the top of my head. But overall, Californians and New Zealand's are going to be your fastest grow-outs, biggest rabbits, best meat-to-bone ratio in the shortest amount of time. Also, don't forget about your feed ratios. There are a few reasons I am known on this app. A big portion of it is homesteading related. I raise my own animals for meat, that being rabbits, chickens, ducks, quail, and gardening. But there is another reason I am known on this app, and it has to do with this certified asshole. My perpetual toddler of a velociraptor, Blickle Rick or Ricardo! But sometimes those two areas clash, and not for people who enjoy my parrot. But for people like this who are like, oh my god, I can't believe you do shit like that. The homesteading part. And they want to be sarcastic. And make a comment like, are you gonna eat the parrot next? I mean, if you keep screaming at 2 a.m. and talking in a demon voice, you need to stop telling me to get out of my own home. I live here too. Stop calling the dogs and then biting them. It's rude. So maybe. But that would be a really expensive meal. And this is my pet, of which I am very fond of. Even if he is a jerk. Plus, I believe the meat yield on him would be pretty poor. All of this to say is if you're going to dish sarcasm out, you better be able to take it. Because sarcasm is my favorite second language. I am serious though, in the fact that Rick would be a very expensive meal. I didn't get a macaw to eat him. I got a macaw to be harassed for the rest of my life. And he's definitely living up to that. So something I do is cage cleaning while I'm breeding rabbits. So I'm about to show you a very dramatic fall off, but do be warned, there is no catch pan underneath the cage because I am currently dumping it. But yeah, this is one of the more dramatic fall-offs that we have here in the barn. Some people have screamers, apparently. I want. But other bucks, when they fall off, look like they haven't even done anything at all. They just kind of shuffle themselves off to the side. And if you watch that doe in the video, how she's up on her toes and she has her butt lifted up towards the buck, that means she's receptive. That's what we want to see when our animals are breeding. Is seeing if your rabbit is good at posing and kind of setting them up a good way to test if your bunny came from a breeder/show home. No, not really, because you have some rabbits that naturally pose on their own, they're good to go, and then you have some rabbits like this little doe who she's been to show before. She hates posing in general. She would rather run the table and be a silly, silly girl. And there's my buck Wiley, who is side-eyeing me hardcore right now because I had him on the table yesterday. I can pose this buck without a problem. I put him on a show table and he's a little heathen. Even though I have multiple best of breeds on this buck, he does not like judges, especially male judges. So if you were to go to pose him, you don't know this rabbit very well, he's gonna probably freak out on you a good bit. But I myself am a show breeder. And I work on posing him quite often. Is Strawberry booted? Does he have too much coloration? So Strawberry is technically not booted, and that's because he does have some break-in patterns above the leg line. So we see up into his shoulders that he has some white breaking up that pattern, and if you look at the back of his neck right here, he also has some breakage. And then he also has some breaking in the mask on his face. With that being said, a few years ago, if I threw Strawberry on the table, he would probably get DQ'd. And that's because it used to be a percentage split on how much color or white could be on a broken. Now, when you're on the show table, it's judge's discretion on whether or not the animal is broken in appearance. So he does just fine. Now, when it comes to his kits, he has quite a variety. So Cyrax here is one of Strawberry's kits, and as you can see, she actually has more white on him than he does. There are 3 of his summertime babies that I got out of him when I bred him to another broken black. The one on the left we called Le Pew. As you can see, he has barely any coloring, and he had a few spots on his back. I would consider him a Charlie, but wouldn't know for sure unless we bred him. The black on the top right also didn't have any color on their face or ears. And then this little poorly colored tri-kit that we had, again, had a blanket pattern, but was less than her father's. And then here was a litter out of our solid doe, other than the Harlequin in the very back. But the 3 does you see up front were from a pairing out of a caster. We've gotten quite the variety out of him when it comes to our broken babies. Everything from Charlie's up to blanketed patterns like he has. But he hasn't thrown a true booted yet. But if he were to throw something undesirable quite a few times, I would just mitigate that by choosing different patterned animals. So if he does better with solid animals, I would breed him with solid. If he does better with a spotted pattern over a blanket pattern, that's what I would do. But also keep in mind when we're breeding brokens together, no matter what their patterning is, you're always at a chance of getting Charlies. But yeah, we love Strawberry. He's great. He makes really pretty babies. Let's talk about colony raising rabbits. It's something I have attempted in the past, and I absolutely disliked it. Hence why I do single rabbit care systems. But there are pros and cons to both systems. Now, if we're talking about the pros of a colony setup, and let's say a true colony setup where you have the buck running free with the does, there are a few things that are beneficial. For one, it can be less work to feed, and the cleaning cycle can be very different in that you do an easy clean in a deep litter system once a month, especially if you litter train your rabbits. And you don't necessarily need to keep track of anything when it comes to breeding cycles. You just kind of see when the babies show up. It's a very hands-off approach. With that being said, let's talk about the negatives. First off, it's hard to control if you're letting your buck loose with your does at all times. It's hard to say when a doe is pregnant, when she's going to give birth, and a lot of times who the mother is if you have multiple females running with your buck. Rabbits in nature are aggressive towards each other. And although you have people who say, oh, bond your rabbits, rabbits can be fine with each other until they aren't. Adult rabbits can maim and kill each other, and it's exceedingly dangerous if you're not going to give them 24-hour supervision. Now, these risks can be mitigated with a larger space, in that the recommendation of space for a colony is at least 10 square foot per rabbit. Now, some places say 10 square foot starting out, plus an additional 5 square foot per rabbit on top. But either way, it's a lot of space. And then additionally adding things like hides. With that aggression, though, we also see aggression of animals towards kits that are in nest boxes. Some people get really lucky in that their bucks leave their kits alone, while others will have bucks that'll completely destroy a nest box and kill all the kits in there. And I've also heard of teenage aggression against young kits as well. So let's say you have a litter that was born, they get to be 2 months old, and you have a newborn litter. Sometimes the older kits will go in and kill the younger kits. Another problem with a colony style that you have to be careful is the spread of disease. E. coli, coccidiosis, RHVD2 if your rabbits are kept on the ground. I highly suggest a concrete system with changeable bedding on top if you are going to do a colony setup. Something that can be easily bleached and wiped down. And then parasitic problems, such as ear and fur mites, are more easily spread. A colony setup is possible, but there's a lot of things you're going to have to face. And statistically, it has a higher mortality. How far along will I line breed my rabbits before we really see any issues pop up? A little bit of background on my breeding program. This is Lulu. She is a lynx, and she is the result of me breeding her back to her father. So her grandfather and her father are the same rabbit. And Monday, I just bred her to her uncle. Her uncle is a lilac. So out of that pairing, I should, in theory, get some more lynx and maybe a couple more lilacs. And I don't expect to have any real issues other than maybe a peanut. And the only reason I say a peanut is I have never had a successful litter out of Lulu, so I cannot say whether she is a true dwarf and her capabilities on producing a peanut, because her uncle is a true dwarf. So in theory, breeding them together will show me whether or not she is a dwarf and whether they can produce double dwarfs. Now you may be thinking, Maddie, that is a lot of inbreeding. Well, in the rabbit community, you're going to hear it's inbreeding if it doesn't work, it's line breeding if it does. And when it comes to rabbits, they work really well with a smaller gene pool. And I see a lot more problems when I outcross to different lines than when I keep my lines somewhat close together. Even when I use, quote, outcrosses, it's still from the same line. So for instance, the babies that Lulu have, I won't breed them back to her, and I won't breed them to the buck I'm using. Instead, I might keep a kit and breed it to this doe right here, who is a cousin of Lulu. So she would be a second cousin once removed from the kits. But her dad is from a completely different line than the buck I am using to breed to Lulu. So in theory, because the rabbits are completely away from each other within the line, it can be considered an outcross. Because the genetic relation between Lulu's kits to this doe are pretty far spread apart. If I wanted a real true outcrossing, I could just use my buck Strawberry, who was the Castor kit's dad. So basically what we do is we just kind of bounce along our lines. Sometimes we breed really close and sometimes we breed further away. But either way, the idea is to keep our coefficients low. And normally my coefficient sits somewhere around 10 to 25%. My highest coefficient is actually a rabbit that I did not breed, who is Zeus, and he's somewhere in the 30s. But even then, I'm not really worried because I don't really see genetic problems from that. And that's because we breed the best and eat the rest. Everyone say hi to the troublemaker. Out of nowhere, my silver pen had a bunch of animals in it that were getting named, which is unusual because normally they get along pretty well with each other unless I had a new rooster. But I had hens that were getting injured. Took me 3 days, but I finally found the culprit. This little jerk right here, that's not her blood. That is the blood of her cage mates. So I'm gonna put her in timeout for the next couple of days, and she's gonna cool off. And then I am going to put her in with a more aggressive roux to keep her in line. And if she tries this again, I'm going to eat her. Which sucks because I absolutely love this little girl. She is just an absolute beauty, but I cannot have aggressive hen going after the rest of my hens and maiming them. So hopefully some timeout does her good. So I have talked about wire cages a million times. If you're interested as the why to why we keep rabbits on wire, go check out my previous videos. But something I don't talk about very often is why we don't have mats in the rabbits' cages. Why don't we have rests? So the biggest component of things like sore hocks is genetics. How the foot is furred. And the genetic markers to keep that nice thick fur covering to protect the feet on wire. If I were to keep rest mats in here, it would not allow me to see whether or not the rabbit naturally had the correct amount of foot covering for them to be on wire. I wouldn't be able to keep an eye on that because there wouldn't be a problem. Because sore hocks just doesn't happen overnight. The hair starts thinning on the back heel of the animal. Then there's irritation, and then there is an open wound. It takes long-term neglect for sore hocks to happen on wire. And I'm constantly checking the bottom of my rabbit's feet. Because if there is a problem, I want to fix it right then and there. Now, when it comes to something like sore hocks, our way of fixing it is hard culling. If I were to find a rabbit with sore hocks on wire, it would be a genetic factor that needed to be removed from my program. Now, with all this being said, I don't necessarily have that problem. The only sore hocks I have ever had in this barn are from rabbits that I have brought in from other rabbitries, and I've fixed the problem on the wire. Some simple first aid, a little time on the wire, and their feet healed right up within a couple of weeks. But sore hocks is a problem I do not want to perpetuate through my lines. So I don't want to hide a problem by using something like a rest, especially when it isn't needed if they have good genetics. Do I sell rabbit meat? I do not, because I don't have the licensing to do so. And right now I have just enough for myself, my family, my dogs. And if I were to go to sell meat, I wouldn't necessarily look at human consumption. I would look at animal consumption and feeding raw to other people's animals. Maybe someday, but right now that's just not in the cards for me. So I have quite a few cages. I have my singleton cages, which are 24 inch by 24 inch. And then I have my grow out / kindling cages, which are 36 by 36 inches. And then I have my other grow out pens in the other barn, which are 92 inches by 24 inches. I have a grow out pin that's 5 foot by 5 foot, and a grow out pin that's 10 foot by 10 foot. I only use the very large cages in the summer as an area where we will put our kits that are about 8 weeks old. I'll split them from male to female, and they'll chill out there from 8 weeks up until they hit butcher age. But I really don't use those pins in the winter because I have really low winter numbers.